evening and welcome to Horror Historian. My name is Amanda and tonight we'll be discussing the 2018 psychological family drama, Hereditary. Now this movie is the feature-length debut for Ari Aster, who quickly proved himself to be a powerhouse of the genre. Now, I will say this movie is devastating, so I will give you that heads up before we go any further. If you have not watched this, go watch this, but do so with the knowledge that it's rough.
Like I said, this movie is directed by Ari Aster. It was also written by him. He is most known for Midsummer and Beau is Afraid. Both are extremely odd and psychologically terrifying, and that's just kind of his vibe. The stars of this movie are Toni Collette, Alex Wolff, Millie Shapiro, and Gabriel Byrne. Toni Collette is a horror icon at this point. She is most known for The Sixth Sense, Krampus, Knives Out, and my personal favorite, which is not a horror movie, Muriel's Wedding. I think it's the first thing she was in, but she's fantastic. Alex Wolff is most known by me for his time in the Naked Brothers band. He's also known for My Friend Dahmer, A Quiet Place Day 1, Pig, and Old. The trajectory of his career has been honestly fascinating to me because I remember the Naked Brothers band. He was the little brother. And now he's doing these movies that he should be winning awards for. He's really good. Anyway, Millie Shapiro is most known for Hysteria and Matilda the musical on Broadway. I also really enjoy her on TikTok. Gabriel Byrne is most known for The Unusual Suspects, The Man in the Iron Mask, and Lamborghini, The Man Behind the Legend. Trigger warnings for family trauma, death of a child, death of a parent, discussions of suicide, religious cults, and extremely complicated family relationships. Also, the dog dies.
Before we get into what exactly happens in this movie, let's introduce everyone in the Graham family. Although this is most certainly a horror movie, you need to know who these people are and their dynamics to completely understand what is going on.
Our main character is a woman named Annie. Very recently, her mother passed away. They had a difficult relationship due to a variety of other reasons. Mental illness was very heavy in their family, including with Ellen. She had dementia and dissociative identity disorder, although at the end of the movie, you kind of wonder about that second part. Ellen's son and husband also took their own lives at some point, only straining the relationship. Annie is married to Steve, and he is by far the most normal person in this movie. He's a psychiatrist, and in general just seems to be like a good guy. Even though he doesn't speak often, he is pretty much the only person keeping this family together. Their oldest son is Peter. He is a teenager and a pothead. He was kept away from Ellen when he was a child. Annie had the most strained relationship with Ellen at this point, so they don't interact that much. The younger child is Charlie, and she is about 13. Annie admits later on that she kind of sacrificed Charlie to her mother, since she felt bad about keeping Peter away from her. Charlie expresses that her grandmother mentioned that she wanted Charlie to be a boy, but it seems as though they had a slightly better relationship than Annie and Ellen.
The movie begins with the funeral of Ellen, a much more full funeral than Annie was expecting. Her mother was very secretive about her private life, so this isn't exactly shocking news, but Annie is still a little taken back by the unfamiliar faces that are mourning her mother and the volume of them.
We learn a little bit about the dynamics of this family through this opening scene, though. We learn that Charlie has been sleeping in the treehouse, even though it is very cold up there. She also has a severe nut allergy that she does not have her EpiPen with her. She's careful about what she eats, but neither one of her parents encourage her to be responsible with the EpiPen, the thing that'll save her. Charlie also has a focal tick, which is popping her tongue. It's something that will become very prominent later on in this movie. The tongue popping is something that will signal that she is around, even if she is no longer walking the earth. She's also contemplating what death is and what it means, which is pretty normal considering the recent passing of her grandmother. This is possibly not helped by Annie working on a miniature dollhouse of a hospice, or that Annie is going to grief counseling but is the only one doing it. She had originally started going after her brother hung himself, and I believe that she was the one that found his body.
Peter was invited to a party where obviously he is intending to take part in a little bit of teenage rebellion, a lot of pot, maybe a little something to drink. He's hoping to hit on a girl that he likes, but Annie makes him bring Charlie, something that neither one of them want to do. Charlie doesn't want to be there. Peter doesn't want to have Charlie there.
Sure enough, as they get there, Peter wants to smoke with his friends and hang out with a girl. He tells his sister to go enjoy the cake and leave him alone. Neither one of them realizes that the cake has peanuts in it, not until it is far too late. Peter is very stoned by the time that Charlie comes running into the room, wheezing. She has anaphylaxis and is not good because, once again, her parents never forced her to run around with an EpiPen. Peter is going as fast as he can in the car with his sister, desperately trying to breathe in the back, to the point where she is sticking her head out of the window in hopes that the air would push past her swollen throat, right in time for Peter to swerve to avoid a dead deer, and possibly the worst outcome possible. Charlie is decapitated by a phone pole. Charlie is dead, obviously. Her body is slumped in the back seat, and her head is left by the side of the road to rot. Peter is in total shock as he drives home, goes upstairs, and lays in his bed. It's a real controversial opinion, but I don't blame him for Charlie's death or his reaction. He was a scared, stoned 16-year-old boy who had accidentally just killed his little sister. He probably didn't know what else to do but lay in bed and stare at the wall.
The scream that Annie releases upon finding Charlie's body is devastating. It's one of the most memorable moments of the movie. While Ellen's death didn't really affect anyone much more than Annie, um, the death of Charlie just completely fractures the family.
Annie becomes resentful of Peter. She is incredibly angry that Charlie died and that he left the body for her to find. A part of her certainly blames herself for the death of Charlie, but she's putting a lot of those emotions on Peter's shoulders. There's a lot of stress on her, and her mental health deteriorates over the course of the movie. Peter also deteriorates drastically, not just because he obviously has a conflicting relationship with his mother, but he also blames himself for Charlie's death. He has no idea what is ultimately planned for him, though. Instead, he's just trying to make it through life. I think if this didn't have the supernatural elements, Peter probably would have just killed himself by the end of the movie. Steve, on the other hand, is trying to protect his son. He knows how Peter feels, and he sees the damage that doing to the team. He tries to end anything that Annie stars, although he is often unsuccessful. He doesn't want to lose another child, and he's trying to keep the peace while also obviously dealing with Charlie's death. He is much quieter about everything than the other members of the family. He holds his own pain and doesn't lash out at Peter or Annie. This is one of the rare instances where the father and the husband of the movie get a gold star, because, man, he's trying.
Annie considers going to the support group, stopping herself in the parking lot as she debates going inside. It has helped her in the past, but that's so much loss for one person to go through. She is stopped by a woman named Joan that recognized her from the previous session when she'd going after her mother's death.
Joan tells the story about how her son and grandson died. She comes off as very well meaning, and they forge a friendship of grief. It's on that grief that Joan will play on. Annie and Peter have a blow up at dinner one night. Steve tries desperately to avoid it happening, but Peter's just chewing far too loud, and Annie is convinced he has an expression on his face that she does not like. Now, this is something that kind of is said a couple times by Annie, where he has like this look on his face, and we only really see it later on in a brief scene where he's looking at a reflection, and like the face he's making is definitely not the actual emotion he's expressing. Blame is thrown back and forth between them. I think they have their own points. Charlie didn't want to go to that party. Peter could have been much safer. Ultimately, it was an unfortunate accident, but neither one of them is really to blame for it. But because Annie is blaming Peter, he turns it back on her. That's where we get the mother speech. It's a really interesting speech, and it's delivered with an Oscar-worthy performance. I think it's also a raw emotion for the moment. She genuinely wishes that this could have been an I'm sorry and it's okay situation, except there was no apology, and there ends up being a lot of pent-up emotions. It drove them apart instead of anything that could have been useful to the family.
The emotions that Annie is going through makes her ripe for Joan. It's been a bit of time since they last spent time together, and this time Joan is very excited. She has something that wants to show Annie. It ends up being a ritual to communicate with the dead.
Because the ritual does work, I do think that Joan had a dead
Grandson. It might have been like another situation where trying to get like a host body for something, but either way, it's clear that they are visited by something during the ritual. It writes and makes noises, something that Annie can't deny. Annie has a panic attack at the possibility of being able to talk to her daughter again. She rushes home to do the same thing and gathers her family. Peter looks terrified, and Steve very clearly does not want to do this and thinks that it's a bad idea. I don't think that he disbelieves her entirely. I think he's just very worried about what this is doing to his family. Annie ends up being briefly possessed by Charlie and speaks in her voice, something that only makes the situation so much worse. Peter is absolutely terrified. The possession only stops when Steve throws water on her. From this moment on, the ghost of Charlie displays some concerning behaviors. It leads Annie to believe that Charlie is pissed off about what happened to her and is lashing out at the family. All the supernatural happenings start to take a lot out of Peter. To try and stop this from escalating to the point that someone gets hurt, Annie tries to burn Charlie's sketchbook to stop it from hurting anyone. Instead of the sketchbook catching fire, Annie does. The only way to stop the fire is by taking the sketchbook out.
One thing that has been bothering Annie since she met Joan, something that was brought up like very briefly in the beginning of their interactions, um, is a mat that Joan has. It's the exact same ones that her mother used to make. This results in her digging through her mother's belongings, trying to figure out how these two know each other.
This entire time, Stephen has been keeping the information away from Annie that something had happened to the gravesite of her mother. He's keeping it from her for a very good reason. She's already spiraling, and this was not going to help the situation. Peter's at school one day and sees Joan outside of the window staring in his direction. Peter doesn't know who she is. He has no idea that she is there to try and get him to scoot over in his body so that Charlie and Paimon can make themselves comfortable. This causes Peter to bash his face against the desk in the middle of class. His father picks him up from school and puts him in bed, since he was hauling really out of it, and his nose is broken, he's messed up. Annie is in the middle of having a total meltdown. She found her mother's decapitated corpse in the attic, and Annie is convinced that the only way to finish this is by burning Charlie's sketchbook. That's when Stephen finally breaks. This is going too far. He's seen the supernatural stuff, but that is so secondary to him, I think, at this point. He is so worried about his family and so dealing with grief. And this sketchbook is the last thing he really has of Charlie. And that's what I think finally pushes him. He finally breaks. This is all going too far. She pushes and pushes him to throw the sketchbook into the fire, even though she believes that doing so will kill her. Stephen is very resistant doing it, and Annie throws the sketchbook into the fire. This time she doesn't catch fire. Stephen does. He goes up in flames and quickly burns in front of Annie.
Annie's face drops in a way that tells us that she's possessed, and this is the final step before getting Peter. In a way, this all attacks Peter's base fear that his mother does not love him and wishes that he was the dead one.
This stems from a sleepwalking incident where Annie doused herself and Peter in paint thinner. She woke up when she was striking the match, and it's something that Peter has never really forgotten. Even though they both know logically it was just something her sleepwalking brain came up with, they both kind of wonder if it wasn't possibly a little bit on purpose. Peter wakes up to a mostly silent house, broken with a repetitive, unfamiliar noise echoing. He's still out of it as he gets out of bed and starts looking for his parents. He can't see Annie crawling around the walls behind him. He finds his father's body and his mother hunched in the corner of the ceiling. He then turns to find his father's naked but unburnt body in the closet. Then Annie is chasing him through the house. She had opened the door to the attic and shut the door behind him when he ran up the stairs, the only place he could think to escape.
Peter is an absolute mess, just crying and apologizing. Annie continues to bash her head against the door, or at least that's what you think is happening. So you hear the door stuff going on, and Peter's apologizing, and then there's silence, and then Annie is floating in the air and using piano wire to behead herself, and it is shocking.
She is intently staring at him as she does it too. That is what breaks Peter and sends him quite literally flying out of the window in the attic. An orb that was following him at school makes its appearance over what we can assume is his dead body. I'm not saying it's impossible to survive a fall like that, I'm just saying that Peter didn't. He is now possessed. We find that out when he makes a popping noise with his mouth. They found a male host to put Charlie and Paimon inside. Charlie, inside of Peter's body, follows her mother's floating body into the treehouse. That is where the two bodies of Annie and her mother have been posed to be worshipping where Charlie now stands. They have Charlie's decapitated head set up with a crown sitting on it. Now that Charlie is there spiritually, they set the crown onto Peter's head. Joan and the rest of the cult hail Charlie and Paimon.
I really don't think there's another way to describe Hereditary other than brilliant. All the pieces come together to really make a fascinating and bone-chilling story, but I do have to give credit to the actors because this could have been so sideways if they had different actors, but these guys they understood the assignment.
Toni Collette, and I'm not the first nor I will be the last to say this, she at least deserved an Oscar nomination. She puts so much genuine grief and trauma into her portrayal of Annie, of someone that was experienced so much loss in her life, her mother, her father, her brother, and her daughter. Families are incredibly difficult, and I say this from experience. You've got all these moving parts that seem really complicated relationships, especially when they die a lot sooner than one was expecting. I also wanted to give this movie a special shout out to the sound design that was done in this movie. Between Charlie having a memorable click that she does, and just the various noises that come up, it really creates this unsettling feeling, even in moments where by all means it should just be a room. Using what seems to be an innocent sparkling light to signify the soul that is trying to take over Peter was also a really great move. It's just a small thing which just notifies us when shit's about to go down.
And thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. This is normally where I would say, would I survive this movie? Um, I'm an only child whose parents were both pretty low contact with their parents. So I don't think I would have this problem, but bright side, I would be Charlie.